Welcome to Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. Every episode, we talk to another interesting photographer, and this is no exception. We have Omar Z Robles as our guest. And before we launch into that, just to remind you that the podcast is brought to you by the Maryland Photography Alliance, where you can check out all things photography. You can learn what's going on in your community. You can find out where there's contests and all sorts of other events to check out. So we encourage you to go to mdphotoalliance.org, where you can pick up all that information. If you go 1 week and you come back the next, there's going to be updated information on activities and other things that are worthwhile. So as I mentioned at the top, want to welcome to the podcast Omar Z Robles. Welcome, Omar.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Mitch. It's a pleasure to be here with you, chatting photography, talking shop as per usual. So thank you so much for having me.
It's hard to believe that when you and I met 7 years ago, it's hard to believe, number one, it was 7 years ago. And secondly, that to look at us, neither one of us looks like we've aged a bit.
Amen to that, I will say. Even though, because this is not visible, people are not seeing the truth. But yeah, I'll say yes.
No before and after picture.
Exactly.
So for those listening, to give context, so I first became aware of your work and the work you're doing in New York City and other places, but at the time, a lot of New York, photographing ballet dancers all around the city, and had the wonderful opportunity to join you and a terrific dancer, not only in Soho and Chinatown and Little Italy, and really watch you and learn as much as we could in a few hours, kind of not only what you do, but a little bit of the mindset behind it. So maybe a place to sort of jump off is with your specialty in photographing dancers as compared to just general photography, general street photography. What do you think some of the biggest differences are just from how you go about doing that?
Yeah. So I say for me, there are two really different and distinct disciplines. Um, where I would say though is that one, they each feed above each other, at least from my creative point of view. I come from the theater background. Before photography, I was a mime, and so I understand, and I understand very well the language of movement, both from a choreographic point of view, but also from a dramaturgy point of view, if that makes any sense. So when I'm out photographing, for example, just straight street photography, I am looking for stories. I am looking for things that are very narrative, and that are very evocative in nature, just from the, let's call it the nonverbal language that you can see in people. And that's where I think, that dramaturgy comes in. I kind of see people almost as characters in this play that I'm imagining, or this movie that I'm imagining in my head as I am photographing. With the dance work, there are similarities in the sense of, then now the dramaturgy comes in two places: in the stage, meaning the scenario, the background, if you want to call it that in photography. That's the stage for me now. And the stage presents its own challenges, but also its own narrative in many ways. So the city has like its grid. It talks on its own in many ways. So, but then when you put in a dancer, there's different elements that then separate it completely from street photography. First, I'm directing, so I am kind of building this, let's call it sculpture, that the dancer will be, in the shape that they will be in, that it's also very evocative, and it speaks, a language of its own. So I think those, if I can say that, those would be the main differences, right? One, I'm directing; the other one, I am observing, and then I'm interjecting in the way that I photograph it, right? Whatever angle I'm using, whatever lighting I'm taking advantage of, and all these things. That's how I construct that photograph. Whereas the other one, there's different combinations, and then there's the specifically the side that I am directing the dancer. And then, yeah, I think they say two different things. If anything, one is about everyday life, and the other one is how I can break everyday life and make people dream. of what everyday life could be in a sense, right? Because that's how this series started. The series with Dancer started as a self-portrait project where I, because of my background, I was, putting the camera on a tripod and then jumping into the scene of wherever I was normally or naturally doing street photography before. But here I would place myself in the scenes and kind of break I don't want to say the monotony, but break the everyday, scenario with something a little bit fantastical, with me creating a stylized pose that was either kind of floating or like stopped in the middle of the action. And that gave the viewers, sort of that, or I would hope it gave the viewers an idea, or the notion of dreaming of what life could be, right? Like I'm the guy in normal everyday life that you probably see me like dancing in the middle of the like bank. When there were banks and we were making lines in the bank, right? Those are were days. Those were our
Olden
days.
times.
Yeah. And I was the guy like doing things in the middle of the line that was kind of off, right? Like people was like, what the heck is this guy doing? And I do that still today, right? It's because I feel that, yeah, why not? Like we are so formatted in living life in this particular way that we don't realize, yeah, you can fucking sing. Like when I'm doing street photography, I catch myself singing all the time, or sometimes even talking to myself out loud. Maybe I'm just a little bit off and no one has told me yet, but like I break out of the norm in a certain way, right? And I think with the dance photography work, that's kind of what I'm aiming for. It's kind of break out from the yeah, everyday norms, and then create something fantastical within the everyday scenario, right? And then obviously you have the dancers that are larger than life, right? They create these poses, they create these things that my grandma can't do, heck, I can't do. You know what I mean? So it makes people dream, and that's, I think, would be the main differences that I'm trying to achieve with those two bodies of work.
Although I will say that you in New York City dancing or singing would not get the same kind of looks as if you were doing that in Topeka, Kansas, because in New York everything goes.
In New York, everything goes, and that's true. But I think photography transcends that, right? Because when people see it, it's not just about what's happening live at the moment, but also it's what gets printed in the photograph, right? And then that gets published, and then people can imagine, like, oh, yes, it's true that oftentimes it's like, wow, that's the kind of thing that happened in New York. Of course, people see it maybe that way, but that's for us that live in New York. We are very we have normalized that a lot, but people that don't live in New York, then they dream, right? And it's funny because then I have been able to transcend this series and then go beyond New York and photograph in Mexico City, in Australia, in Brisbane, in Melbourne, in Hong Kong, and other different cities, right? Some of them are smaller cities, like I was like in Cleveland, Ohio, once. Wow.
Yeah,
Is it Cleveland,
culture
Ohio?
shock.
Yeah. Yeah, what a culture shock it was. But still was able to create something very beautiful over there, because it's really about, and shout out to Cleveland, right? It was beautiful, it was interesting, but it's like you said, it's a stark, like difference from like New York with all the crowds, with all the noises and all that stuff, and then going somewhere that is completely different. And for me, it's still someone else's everyday, right? And when you put a dancer there and change the narrative, then it changes also their perspective. So yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure that as people were listening and we're kind of talking through some of your backgrounds and what formed your view of things, somebody probably is rewinding and saying, "Did he say mime?" So I want to just go back for a second because aside from learning the art of mime, and learning it in part from the legendary Marcel Marceau, what got you interested as a 16-year-old or thereabouts to even pursue learning about mime? That's that would be people do it obviously, but it's a relatively non-traditional thing that people get into. What kind of piqued your interest?
That's a great question. And it's interesting because oftentimes when I do interviews and I say mime, like even the interviewer is like, "What did he just say mime?
Right.
What?" And then it's even been like transcribed, and and there was one interview that they thought I was saying mind. I was like, all right. but yeah, I was a mime. Mime, it's an art form that is, it's beautiful, and it's sadly kind of a lost art form at this point in time. There are still people that that practice it. But I think because of modern day, uh, not just a technological thing, but it's more like I don't know how people view things nowadays. Um, people are people's attention spans are way shorter, and they want things like force fed, or not force fed, but what's the right
They
word?
want them instant gratification.
Yeah, like spoon fed, like, and have everything instantly. And mime is an art form that requires a little bit of imagination. And it's not about charades. Mime is not a thing about trying to make you guess what it is that the artist is
Mhm.
doing. It's realistically about the artist being able to connect with people in a very, I would say, primal way, because nonverbal language, it's something that we all do. We all do it every day. Even, like, as I'm speaking, my body is doing certain things that are transmitting a certain message, right? And that's what mime is all about. It's really about creating art based strictly in that nonverbal language, but you're doing it on purpose, right? You're constructing a narrative using your body as the main tool. And what got me into that, to answer your question, since I was a kid, I was a ham. Let's just say it straight out. I've always liked attention. I've always like, and it's interesting because I guess you can call me an ambivert in that sense. Is like, I like to be on stage. I like attention in that sense, but then also, like, on one-to-one scenarios, sometimes I struggle. And smaller crowds, I struggle for sure. But if it's a big crowd, I like to play to the big crowd. So when I was a kid, I always, liked performing, and like, I got into like the schools, talent shows and all this stuff. Um, a little bit with dancing, and then I discovered as well magic. And I loved the idea of magic, of like making people believe that something, fantastical can happen, that you can disappear a coin and all these things. And I also love telling jokes. So all those things led to, when I was around, in like, when I started middle school, I started doing gymnastics as well. So I started discovering the possibilities of the body, and what the body can do, and again, going outside of like what everyone can do, and achieving, all this, like, I don't know, like somersaults and things, like, kind of defying gravity in a certain way. And mime, in many ways, defies gravity and also defies time. When you're building, I think one of the things that I loved about mime is that, when you construct a mind play, oftentimes it's almost like cinema. You can fast forward and backtrack and do all these things with time, that it becomes elastic. And obviously, when you're creating illusions, which for the most part in American tradition, that's what they saw about mime. The whole like wall thing. It's like, oh, how do you do the wall and all this stuff,
Running
which is
against the
beautiful.
wind, I'm in a box, all those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is beautiful, but when you study it further, it's more than just that. It's really about creating the scenes that people can relate to, right? So so yeah, I mean, when I discovered it, I would say it was around. I think the first time I learned about mime was in elementary school, maybe like around fifth or sixth grade. But then it wasn't until later that then, like, I found it that this is something that I could do. And I back then, I was in there's a long story behind it, but long story short, it was in church. I got into a mime troupe. And then I later, discovered, okay, this is something that I want to do beyond just preaching, or like the ministry, right? I really want to pursue this as an art form. So I started, pursuing it more and more as an art form. And then at some point, like, when I grew up, and yeah, I don't want to get into the idiosyncrasies of that, but like, I left the church and like became an adult. I kept pursuing it because it was like, it was really magical what you could achieve through this. And it's a feeling, I think anyone that uses their body as a primary form of like, creating and expressing art, will tell you that it's a very unique sensation in the body when you're performing, that nothing else achieves it. Like, it's almost like a body high, in
Mm.
that sense. It's like you are there, and because this is the one thing about performance art specifically. I want to say mime, but I want to say performance art in general, is that you are both the artist and the art, right? Like photography, I create the photo, it's separate from me. I can hide away, no one needs to see me. But when you are the performer, there's no escaping. The vulnerability level, it's like super high because you I'm gonna curse because I curse. You fuck up in front of everyone, and everyone can see it, and that's part of the vulnerability,
Yeah.
right? No one necessarily knows it, all the stuff. Sometimes people know it, but the thing is that yeah, you are there in the moment. So there's no more present art form, I would say, because even if it's like, yeah, you do it like in film and there's like they record it and you can redo the scenes and all this stuff, whatever. But really, it's like it's its own thing. I don't know how else to describe it, but yeah, that's what got me into mine.
Well, and what's interesting, and one of the things that I learned from you walking around the streets with you is that your experience in mime and understanding body control and movement. You talked to me about when you're photographing a dancer, how there's certain moments in that dance or in holding a pose, creating a pose, that the body is at a point where maybe the hand is not fully extended, then it's fully extended. And that's the shot you want. It's almost like the decisive moment, like it's close, it's close. That's the shot. That's the moment. And, that was a takeaway for me from spending time with you. And when a viewer looks at the images you create, and you have dancers either by themselves within a cityscape, or you might have multiple dancers where one dancer is literally leaping above the other. You're trying to capture the dancer or dancers in that peak point of their pose. Am I saying that fairly, or would you add to that?
No, that you're expressing it perfectly, and I love that that was a takeaway for you from our time together because it's really about that. I mean, and I think again, even in street photography, that's the moment. That's what I would call the decisive moment, right? Like when an action just like peaked and then it's about to change, right? Because that's the moment where you don't know where it's going to land, right? And that's the moment that is suspended in a certain way. And it's interesting because in mine we always call about suspension. It's like, lifting yourself to this point where it's that's where you don't know what else is going to happen. And then it leads your brain to imagine. So like if you photograph a dancer, I think mid mid pose or mid jump where it's not the peak. First you're making it's a disservice to them because they have worked so hard to achieve this technique, to achieve this this um climax or this peak, right? I don't know what's the right word. I know there's another word that is not climax, but we'll find it. But they have worked so hard to achieve this form that if you photograph it and portray it before that or after that, then you're doing a disservice to them in one sense, but also you're doing, I think, a disservice to the audience. I mean, there are other people that think differently, and that's fine. But my take is that I like to find that moment because it's so short to find that right moment. That one, I think, in its own, it's its own prowess, if that's the right word. Like it's its
Mm-hmm.
own like victory, little victory or big victory. Um, but also really, it's the most expressive. And again, same for dance, same for street photography. When you're out there, photographing these moments in the street, really you want to try to find, and with street photography is different in the sense that like there's no technique to it, but what there is pattern. Like you see everything.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen this many times before, right? And that's what we're trying to photograph is these patterns of everyday life. That when you create this moment, like I have this photograph of like two gentlemen in the street, and one there's like a dollar coming out of his pocket and the other one is pointing the dollar, and then this guy is like looking at the guy, but at the same time almost looking at the dollar, and trying to figure out what the heck's happening here to me, and all this stuff. So moments like that are that expressive, and that particular moment where you see the tension, not a bad tension, but when I talk about tension, it's like you see the dramatic tension of something happening, something is about to happen or something just happened. And that's what I think it's interesting, and that's what I'm looking for.
Well, and you may see what I'm about to say the same, or you may see it as different sort of silos or forms of your photography. But I see, work where you are shooting the dancer by themselves in an environment, and the focus is really the dancer, and then really unique environments many times, which I definitely want to touch on. But then you also have images you create where the dancers are doing just wonderful things, but there's somebody else, a bystander in the composition, who is either reacting to this incredible dance move that's happening unbeknownst to them, or maybe they're completely not reacting to it, which makes it even more funny because you think, how are you not reacting to this dancer doing that 3 feet away from you? So, when you go with a dancer and you're going to spend X amount of time together, are you, putting the dancer sometimes in positions where there's likely to be people coming in and out to kind of create those environments or increase the likelihood of some kind of a reaction? Or are those totally organic and somebody just happens to come by and you want to get that shot then?
So for the most part, it's organic, because I cannot control what's happening in the street. Um, so for the most part, it's organic, and oftentimes it's kind of like Murphy's Law. Like I go to a street hoping that it's empty because I want to like get something very specific, and then just cars pass by or people pass by, and then it's like, oh, but I'm not gonna stop, and then that causes like kind of beautiful accidents. There's one photo that I have. Honestly, it's one of the most beautiful photos for me, just because it's so serendipitous, where like there's a dancer in the middle of the in the middle of the street, and there's two trucks coming like from each side, kind of like framing the dancer. And for some reason, both trucks, if I'm not mistaken, like at least one is like a, I don't know if it's a UPS truck, but it's a delivery truck, and there's no door, so you can see the driver. And on the other one, kind of as well, and you see both drivers like looking back at the dancer, and it's blurred because of, like I mostly photograph at like f1.2, or like wide open, but you can see the energy from the both guys like behind. They're both like directed, right? So that's just serendipitous. There's been a few moments where I kind of planned it, um, but not, again, not planned it. It's just like I saw the possibility of something happening and I went for it. And one of the most beautiful ones was, I saw, the great Bill Cunningham coming in, and I was in Bryant Park. I saw him, with his bike and his blue, like lab jacket,
Yeah.
and it's unmistakable, And then I saw him, and we were on the corner waiting for the light to change. And then I saw him in the back, and I told the dancer, when the light changes, run, like run to the center of the street, because I we need to make this, and we need to make this happen fast. She didn't know what was going on, but I just said, like, run, like, don't wait, just run, and I don't care if there's people passing. I just need you in the center. So we did that. She ran. She started the pose, and then Bill saw us, and he got off his bike and then started photographing at us. So I have this photo of like me, of the dancer, and then Bill Cunningham in the back photographing at us. And I think, that's like, I don't know if for me, that was iconic for me to make that happen. There is a photograph somewhere on Bill's archives, possibly, of the dancer and me. So that photo must be somewhere. Um, because of whatever. I don't care if I'm the photo anyway, but like it's interesting, right? It's an interesting happenstance, or I don't know if that's the right word, but it's an interesting thing to happen. And then I do have that photo of Bill in the back and the dancer, and for me that's like crazy. And then that was maybe like a year before his passing. So also like it was like amazing for me to have like the experience of having that moment. So yeah, there's like a few moments like that where I just prayed that it would happen, and it happened.
Well, it's funny, as we were talking, I jotted down a note because I remember that picture. And for those of you who are not familiar, Bill Cunningham was a absolutely legendary New York Times photographer who would photograph people with and fashion on the street, and he would identify trends often well before the fashion houses had even identified them. He kind of had his, to use that expression, finger on the pulse of what people were in many cases just organically choosing, whether it was colors or patterns or, and he would have his light blue lab coat. And I mean, he had to live until I want to say his 80s, but he was working right until the end, and he lived in Carnegie Hall. And I mean, just a legend. And I don't think you'd ever find a more modest person in terms of personality than Bill Cunningham. He really didn't realize what an icon I think that he was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a beautiful documentary on him. I think it's on YouTube if I'm not mistaken, but like
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's like someone that lived for his craft, and he was so passionate about what he did that, and definitely a model to pursue or to, yeah.
Somebody, if your passion or your career is photography and you're not familiar with Bill Cunningham, you want to become familiar with him because
Yeah.
he really was wonderful, and certainly not out for his own byline. If anything, he was happy to stay, behind the scenes. Well, in talking about your work, I would say that as obvious a subject as the dancer or dancers are, the way you combine the dancer or dancers with the backgrounds to me is amazing. I just think that the backgrounds are not the subject, they're sort of like a secondary subject, they're an environment, but the way you blend the two, to me, the colors and just the feeling is incredible. I mean, do you do a lot of location scouting in unfamiliar cities, or how do you come across the areas that you want to shoot within?
No, I don't do a whole lot of scouting, honestly. For me, I think when you are in the street, like as a street photographer, you really get a sense of the environment. It becomes like, I don't know if I should call it like a sixth sense, but it just becomes second nature. It's the best way I can describe it. So you really get a feel for where you're at and the lighting and all these things, and then how to use it. It's kind of like, it's hard to describe it in the sense that I've seen this with other photographers where like I can't do what they do because it's so natural for them the way they do it and the way they see the world that it's just it just comes easy to them. And in my case, because I'm always in the streets, and when I travel, for example, to any different city, I naturally, the first day that I get there, I usually just hit the street and start walking. And I'm not looking for anything. It's just like I'm I'm letting life, and the city talk to me. I remember, like, an anecdote that I often use, but I think it was I think it was even here in New York, which is interesting because I know New York like the palm of my hand. And I was working with with this dancer, and she's, we had been working for a little bit, but we started walking, and at some point she tells me, like, is there anything in particular that you're looking for? And I said, no, I'll know it when I see it. It's like I'm not looking for anything specific because it's things that jump at you, whether it's the lighting, whether it's the color, whether it's textures. And then when you find it, so yeah, I try not to scout too much because I have found that the times that I prepare too much, it kind of spoils the experience because then now I'm like focused on like I want to do this, and this doesn't really happen necessarily how I wanted it, and then you get
Mhm.
frustrated and then you get in your head. So for me, like I see oftentimes the sessions almost like tennis, it's like I go out there and I play, and then I have to just it's kind of like a play by play kind of thing. It's like just live in the moment and let things unfold, and it's served me well for the most part. So I've kept doing it.
I remember you and I were in an alley that was in Soho, kind of just across from where the REI store is.
Yeah.
And the dancer was, doing all these different poses, etc. And you suggested that I get a little bit lower, so I'm shooting, not from eye level, but a little bit lower. And so I thought, okay, well that makes sense. And so I get real low. I get low to the point where I'm literally laying on the road in the alley, and I'm, taking pictures. And then after, we had kind of done that, before I got up, I realized whatever I'm laying in is wet. And I'm not sure I want to know what's making the ground wet in the middle of the road because it hadn't rained the night before.
Mm, I'm sorry.
But I tell you what though, I was in the moment, and then not long after in the shower. But what one of the things that the many things that so impressed me with your work is, the word gets overused, but I'm going to use it, and that's authenticity. I recall there was a moment when the dancer was getting up inside of the frame of a window to create a pose inside the window, and you were going to be photographing her first. And I noticed just a piece of garbage that was on the sidewalk kind of in front of where she was, and I went to take it out of off the sidewalk so it wouldn't be in your shot, and you said, no, 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 leave it there. It's there. It was there before we got there. Just leave it there. And I thought, well, why wouldn't you? Because we're on the street. Otherwise, are we going to vacuum the sidewalk? Are we going to, and it was just, it was interesting because that very, brief comment of no, no, don't move it, that stayed with me. And then, the other thing that stayed with me is the absolute highest level of respect and care that I took away from watching you work with a dancer. And I remember this particular dancer was about to get down from this windowsill, and I extended my arm to try to assist the dancer, helping her get down from the window. And you kind of looked at me, and then later on you said, if the dancer would like some assistance, absolutely help them. But you don't want to sort of put that on the person, like the expectation of it. And I thought it's so subtle, the difference between offering to help and being ready to help if asked. And I just thought, that's probably part of the many reasons why the dancers, especially I'm going to say when you're working with a female dancer, why they feel so comfortable with you. And so maybe you could kind of just speak to that dynamic of photographer, dancer, and oftentimes when you're dealing, when you're a male and you're working with a female dancer, just establishing a comfort level and trust and respect and all those things that ultimately we should all do in everyday life, but from a photographer perspective helps build a rapport with the person that you're photographing.
Oh man, thank you so much for bringing that up, and that's something that has always been very important to me. It's respect, it's all about like I think common common decency and respect that we owe each other. Again, for me, I have a really you know great admiration for dancers and what they do, but generally with anyone that it's in front of my camera. My brother, who I took on photography after my big brother. He's also a photographer. He's most a writer, but he's also a photographer. And one of the things that he taught me early on is like the camera is like it's a weapon. It's something that is very powerful, and it can it can destroy you or it can build you up. It can build someone up or it can also do a lot of harm. But going beyond the camera as the instrument, photography and these moments that we have with the people that we're photographing, are very vulnerable. People are, in a place where they're kind of, you know, risking a lot by being there in front of you. They're giving a lot as well. So you also have to be very appreciative of what they're giving you, their time, their likeness, you know, their talent. And it's something that I value as something precious. So I will be very careful with it. And I think, it's about learning how to follow their boundaries and understand that the boundaries are there innately. It's really to learn where are those boundaries and then know how to respect them. So that's why, for example, I never usually, whenever I'm, even when I'm doing like, when I'm photographing strangers in the street, I do this, I have like the same exact approach. First, if I'm if I'm doing a portrait specifically, I photograph the person, and then at some point, if I need to get closer, I ask first. I say like, I'm gonna get a little bit closer. Is that okay? Because I don't want anyone to come out from a bad experience. And it's subtle things, but it's things that like that are important to me because I would like people to treat me that way in that sense. So that's the way I approach it. Like in the case that you were explaining, like if the dancer is gonna get from the off from anywhere, like I just stand and let them tell me what they need. And I think, that speaks volumes for them as well. So that's basically the approach that I try to take, and again, it's something that after doing what I've done for so many years and photograph as many dancers I have photographed, it's something that even they tell me afterwards, when we have experience to like chat or talk at some point, they tell me, listen, I appreciated that you did this for me. I appreciated that you did that for me. Um, and 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 the testament is in the fact that I, like last time I counted somewhere around 500 dancers that I photographed.
Wow.
So and a lot of the dancers that I photographed, especially in New York, I have photographed them for years. I've worked with them for years because we have developed a rapport, a good relationship of respect, of mutual respect, and I think we both appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, I've seen dancers grow oftentimes. Like I some dancers that I started photographing when they're like 19, and I've seen them like get married and have kids. That also says how old I am, but also that also says that there's value in those relationships, and most importantly is that they feel safe enough around me that they want to come back.
Yeah, no question. Well, I know there is a place that you and I both hold dear to our hearts to go photograph, and that is Cuba. And I've been fortunate to spend about a month, 5 weeks or so in my life in Cuba around various cities over three different trips there. For you, what is it about Cuba that you just really enjoy photographing there?
So I'm Puerto Rican, and Puerto Rico and Cuba have a long, history, of like sibling islands.
Hmm.
The history is shared in many ways, especially back in the 50s. I mean, going back to like colonization, but then as the like the U.S. took over Puerto Rico in 1898, if I'm not mistaken. And then, there's a lot of shared history there where, you know, my dad went to Cuba when I was growing up, and he went there like in a humanitarian mission, and it's something that I always wanted to do. And when I had the opportunity to do it, I jumped into the opportunity, and then getting there, it was like literally like meeting long lost relatives all of a sudden. It was like, because I've met Cuban people, over here, of course, but meeting them there, it was like a completely different experience for me. And then from the purely visual standpoint, it's just beautiful. Uh, it's kind of sad at the same time because there's obviously there's this decay that's going on there that I'm assuming that is progressed with time. Um, but there is some beauty about it, and it's not just about decay. I think it's really about the nostalgia of what was before, right? Like the same thing happens in Hong Kong when you go to Hong Kong, or even you don't even have to go that far. As it doesn't even have to be like decay to that level. Even like in Barcelona and Spain, you see, like, yeah, you see. I don't know if this is the right word, but you see the vestiges of the past. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
like the markers of what once was. I mean, I lived in Barcelona. I think it was 2023, or yeah, 2023. And to think that some of those places, like, were there for like, since the medieval times.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous that we're now walking in the streets. It's utterly utterly ridiculous in a certain way, or like not in a bad way, but more like in like a surreal way. It's like we're walking in the same streets that people walked in hundreds of years ago. um and I find that just beautiful. So for me, there's that, right? And Cuba being having that history with Puerto Rico as well, then it just became very magical for me to be able to be there. And again, seeing all that history in the buildings, it's written there, so it's hard to ignore. And that visually transforms into something magical. So again, being able and then obviously there's a fact also from the dance perspective, is that the Cuban dancers have a like a rich history. in terms of their technique. They were classically trained from the Russian school mostly, so their technique is very specific. It's very strong, and there's so many things you can say about this, but like there's this hunger and this passion for it that you don't see anywhere else in the world oftentimes, because especially in the US, it's coming in this kind of like first world problems kind of situation where people, do these things. Over there, people really do it from a passion standpoint.
Oh yeah.
The dancers that I met there, are single-handedly some of the best in the world, and they're living it in their skin in a way that I haven't seen anyone do it before. So I think that's what really made it like seal the deal for me. That was like, yeah, the most special part.
Yeah, I know, having been there and photographed boxers and photographed flamenco dancers, and in one case going to a ballet school, and I think the motivation is it's very genuine, because frankly, there's just not a lot of opportunity there. So, where you mentioned the idea of first world problems, et cetera, in the US, for example, when, a new video game comes out, you have a lot of people who are super excited, or the next, iPhone, they're waiting around the building for the phone. That's not happening in Cuba. And so people who are passionate about whatever it is, um, those passions have been around for decades and now generations, because frankly there's only so many things to do. So whether it's stickball in the street, or it's kicking a soccer ball around that probably the ball probably should have been retired about 15 years ago because the ball barely looks like a ball anymore, or dancers who are really struggling to have adequate supplies. I mean, you have to love what you're doing to be dedicated in a tough environment. And just to see the dedication there, I was it was kind of amazing. And to see the artists who are taking doors that have just fallen off buildings literally and turning them essentially into their canvases, and finding cardboard boxes to use as literally their canvases to paint on. It's just, if you haven't been and you can go, it really, I think, I don't know. I think without sort of being political, I think in many ways the people of Cuba bring out the best in people, because everybody has to work together to make it a better tomorrow. I think probably in the States and other countries as well, there's just such an emphasis on me, 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 me. But there, it's like it's very community oriented. So I've enjoyed my time there. Yeah, I've taken me and my very broken Spanish from days of playing baseball, and tried to talk cars with a lot of the guys there who are, using 1970s motors in 1940s and 50s vehicles. So it's interesting for sure. Really is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, it's not to try to like fantasize or poverty or all this stuff, but it's hearing it from their own words. I remember like I once took a cab ride with over there, and and kind of casually, maybe a little bit ignorant of me, but I asked the driver. It's like it's just like so interesting to me to see how much necessity there is here, but at the same time seeing how much like happiness there is. Like
Mhm.
people are like genuinely like, you know, I'm not gonna say they're happy, but like there's a level of like ease in the midst of the struggle, right?
Mhm.
And then he was like, yeah, porque aquí está todo jodido. It's like everything's fucked up here anyway. So like
Right.
there's nothing you can do. Like if it's fucked up, there's nothing you can do about worrying about it. So you just like go along with it. You do what you can with what you have, and obviously they are the biggest testament of that, right? Like you were saying, they're making do, but they're doing it, very well. Whereas here, like something happens and everyone's like, oh my god, what am I gonna do now? And suddenly the wall falls apart. And it's like that's a testament when you see, things like that people, just keep on moving, keep on going.
I know recently I was up in New York at the Leica store in the meatpacking district and saw your book there. at the Leica store, and um, I know, of course, that you've got your social media presence. So, as we're sort of entering 2026 and the things that you have going on, I know we talked a little bit about your involvement with NFTs. And so, for the uninitiated, maybe you can kind of give some sense of, what is an NFT, and then how you've gotten involved in that world with your artwork.
Yeah, I mean, so not to overcomplicate things because it can get very complicated when you get into the technical side of things. But essentially, the NFT for me is just another avenue to sell my work. To put my work in the hands of different audiences. And the NFT is just a form. Imagine just selling a finer print. You're selling a print, but in this case, instead of selling a physical print, basically what you're selling is the digital certificate of authenticity of the photograph. So people, buy your work, and it's a way for people to support your work and your career. And basically, the image is stored it's not just stored in a server; it's stored across different servers in the blockchain. As well as the certificate of authenticity itself that carries the basically a ledger that hosts all the metadata and information about that photograph, not only the photograph itself, but also your authorship, as well as the transactional history of the image. So, let's say someone buys your photo, that is registered on that ledger. And then in the exact pricing of how much it was bought for or traded for is registered on that ledger. And every time it exchanges hands, it's also registered. So from an authenticity point of view, it's interesting because one, being able to see who the buyers are, I think it adds legitimacy as well. For example, in my case, one of my photographs recently was purchased by a bank in Switzerland.
Mm.
So now that's like in the ledger there, permanently inscribed in the metadata that this bank, added that photo to their collection. So I think that already adds a certain value to the piece. And if it exchanges hands again, it's always going to be seen, how much it was sold for. Where, for example, like in the gallery world, sometimes, you kind of get swindled by, and they tell you, oh, this artist's last piece was sold for like $3 million, and there's no way to prove that, right? Like
Sure.
unless, you do a lot of due diligence, oftentimes you just go along with what they're telling you. Where in this case, with the blockchain, you can exact because the information is public in the blockchain, then you can actually go in and see how much it was sold for. You're not being fooled. So in that sense, there's that sense of at that level of authenticity and provenance to the photographs or to the artworks. So I think that's the best way I can explain it. And for me, when I got into it, honestly, in the very beginning, I couldn't really gauge everything from the technical side. But what I did understood was that there's an audience there, and there were buyers. There were people willing to buy art in this form. So even if I didn't understand it, it's like, who am I to tell them what they can or cannot buy? If I have a supply, I'm happy to provide it, right? And that's how I started. And the other side of things were, but again, this is not different to the art world. People in the art world, or like, let's say, in the physical art world, they speculate with art as well. So they will buy piece and basically take loan against those assets. They
Hmm.
will, use it in a certain way to kind of like kind of park their, net worth in a certain way. So people are doing the same thing in the NFT space as well. People are buying art pieces, and then, like, some of my collectors, for example, maybe not with my work directly, but I know that they use those assets to take loans against those assets, those digital assets. And even they are like buying, and buying land and stuff like that with using digital assets as collateral, for example. So all those things can be done. It's just in a digital form, which adds a little bit of less friction in certain areas because, for example, now if someone from Japan wants to buy my works, they can buy them and they don't have to wait for deliveries or anything like that. They're buying them right straight off, the website or the platforms. And then they can, and it gets stored in the blockchain anyway. So there's also a little bit less friction in that, in the storage side and all these things. So that's mainly the bulk of it in many ways. and I've had a great experience meeting and making connections with collectors from all over the world, or all different like walks of life. Like one of my biggest collectors just happened to be one of the creators of Google Earth, for example. It's like, in what world would I've thought I could have met this person? But otherwise, we met in this, in this space, mainly online. Now we are very good friends, and we see each other every once in a while physically. But yeah, I mean, this kind of possibilities opened up when this world, opened up to me. And again, I didn't understand it very well in the beginning, but what I understood as an artist is that this was an opportunity for me to keep, growing and sharing my work in a different way. So I took it, and it's done quite well.
That's one of the real positive things of technology. I mean, there's always, like everything, there's some good and some bad, but technology has expanded the opportunity for creatives to earn a living and to grow their notoriety, and that can only be good, as an artist. Speaking of notoriety and social media, et cetera, I've got to tell you that not only do I, number one, enjoy your social media and the photos you post, and I just really enjoy them, but something that I think is newer and I think is great is your series on YouTube of calling BS on things. So, how did that get started? Because, you're walking down the street and you say, I got to call BS on, fill in the blank. So, what did you just have enough of something and you said, I got to get this out of my head? And because other people have to be thinking this, how did that get started?
Well, it's a little bit of that, and definitely there's that side that I've always had, like different. I'm not gonna lie, as someone that has like strong opinions about things, I've always wanted to share them in a way, but you know, YouTube as a format, it takes a lot of work, and like if you want to do something like long form that YouTube kind of requires in order for to get growth. um it was like, I don't really have like the bandwidth to like do like long videos. And honestly, it kind of came to me out of the blue one day. It's like, wait, what if I do like a short format thing where I just, uh, you know, just speak one topic that it's in my mind and make it very short and digestible, and that's how it was kind of born. And then honestly, it was like a matter of like a week. I started like recording all these videos, and yeah, I mean, it's a way for me to put my face forward as well, because also when you're a photographer, oftentimes you are not oftentimes, for the most part, you are behind the camera. No one sees you. It's kind of like anonymous in a certain way. And it's not like me trying to get, like a hold of get attention in that way. But I thought, like I have a voice, I have things to say. I'm going to use, I'm going to do it. And I, like everything else, it's like I'll tell you this, one of the biggest compliments I've gotten from a fellow artist. He told me once in a group setting. It was when when I was working with Adobe Lightroom as an ambassador, and we had like this, monthly checkups, and we talked about each other, and like, we talked about different things. And then one of the biggest compliments one of the other artists said is like, what I admire about Omar is that he's not afraid of making mistakes publicly. Like he's not afraid of putting himself out there and experimenting things, and if they work, they work. If they don't work, they don't work. But he's not afraid of trying things in a way that is very vulnerable. And this is kind of that, like I started it as an experiment. People have taken to it, and they have appreciated it. And then for me, it's not just about like get off my lawn kind of moment. It's not just things that's like screaming about bad things. I also take the opportunity to be encouraging. So some of them are about, like, for example, like the last one that I published is about like people that think that film photography is like the highest form of art. And it's like, no, it isn't. It's not because you're using film, it makes your art any better than digital. That's just, BS. So why not call it, right? But then there's other ones, like I posted one about talent versus practice. We often have like this thing of like, oh, you have to be talented, and yeah, you can be talented, but you can also be like a hustler. And like there's I think there's merit in both, and actually there's a little bit more merit in someone that goes out and is out there every day and outlasts everyone else, because it's not about how good they are, but how long they can last, doing what they do. So you know how they say it's not about the size of the boat, it's about how you rock it, right? So how long you can rock it, for lack of better analogy, right? So it's really about that. It's just me sharing my opinion, and I started it as an experiment. It's doing well. Some people haven't comment negatively about it too, but that's their opinion, and that's fine. That's why we talk, and we have dialogue. And I don't censor when people say, oh, I don't like what you're saying. It's like, good. It's fine that we're having this conversation. So yeah. And I'll keep doing it as long as as I get ideas. Maybe I'll stop at some point. I don't know. But for now, and the most important thing about it, I will say, is just like it's me having fun. And I think at the end of the day, it's if you're not having fun with what you're doing, you might as well not do it. Um, you know, we it's all about self promotion. Let's not lie to ourselves here. Like it's really about self promotion, but in a way that it's fun for me. Like right now, for example, just to jump subject a little bit, but like I launched this NFT collection that I'm working on, and I'm discovering things about myself, about what I'm promoting the work, that I'm not planning this stuff. It's just like I just come up with the stuff in the spot, but at the same time, I'm really enjoying it, and that's what makes it different. That's what makes me want to stay doing it. So the same thing with this calling BS videos is it's really just about me having fun, and you know hoping that people tag along with me, and so far it's been a good ride. So yeah.
Well, the good news is you'll probably never run out of things to call BS on. So as long
Probably.
as you enjoy it, you're not going to run out of source material.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
that's for sure. So I know that people are going to wonder, when you head out with a dancer or dancers to do a shoot, what are your kind of go-to focal length lenses? Are you shooting prime? Are you shooting zoom? Are you shooting combination of the two?
No, I mostly only use primes. I think I only owned Zooms when I was doing journalism, just because of how like
It's more
practical they
practical.
are. Yeah, in those scenarios. But for the most part, I'm using primes when I'm photographing dancers. Mostly you will see me around the 50 to 85 focal lengths. Um, just because I like how it compresses the background, and it kind of like it's able to still tell a story. I don't think I will go further than at times I have used like a equivalent to a 135, but I think at that point it takes away too much of the story in the background. So I think the 85 and the 50, provide enough of context in the background that I can include, making the background like the supporting protagonist of the story, and then making the of course the dancer the protagonist, because also how much of like that pop it creates, like the separation. um and then I will use like a 28 at times, or 24 at times, when I want to then create more, exaggerate a little bit the perspective as well. So like oftentimes when I'm photographing jumps, for example, then I will do that, because then I can get really low, and then it makes the lens like a little bit more it accentuates the length of the dancer's extremities, like the
Mhm.
extension. So yeah, but at the end of the day, like you see there's like one of the most important things, like the intent that there is around everything that I'm using. There's a specific purpose to it. So I think that's what people should take more into consideration after all. um because at the end of the day, it's people often ask me that question, and at the end of the day, it's less about what I'm doing, and it's more about what you want to do. So you have to use the tools that work for you, depending, and if they happen to coincide with my tools, of course, so be it. But at the end of the day, it's more for people. And I guess that's one of the things that I kind of should call BS on, and I kind of did at some point. It's like, don't try to emulate the people that you admire. Try to find your own way, at the end of the day, because it's at the end of the day you try to find your own vision, and that's really what's going to set you apart. when you find your own voice, and that voice is expressed obviously through your technique and through everything that you use. So when people ask me about like focal lengths and all that stuff, like what I usually try to tell people is like, this is what I use, but really try to find what works for you at the end of the day. Because, for example, there's a photographer, and I think I forgot his name. I think his name is Josh Rose. He's from LA, and he works mostly with wide angle lenses with dancers, and his work is spectacular and it's beautiful. And his work is nothing to do like it's very different from what I do, but I love his work because it has its own like very distinct voice, and I really appreciate that. So yeah.
Yeah, I get asked, in my field of specialty, sports photography, I get asked by young sports photographers, what can I do to get this opportunity or whatever. And I'll just tell them that if you can functionally make a photo, that's you and about 10,000, 20,000 other people or more, especially with the capabilities that today's cameras come with. It's really about you having your own vision and your own look, because they'll hire you for your look, that your eye and the way you create images. If you can just competently make a picture, well, then get in line with everybody else, but you're not going to differentiate yourself. You're probably not going to make a living doing it, because there's just too many people who can functionally make a competent picture, which is a version of what you're saying is, you can look at everything that's out there, and you probably should, but find your particular vision and the way you see things.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is that the only way to achieve that is by doing it. That there's no secret sauce, and there's no um how do I find my way? The only way to find your way is to doing it, and to doing it a lot. You go
Yeah.
out there, you put yourself a lot in those situations, and that's when eventually you're gonna find, okay, this is what talks to me, and this is what makes me me. Um, but no one's coming to rescue you in that sense. Like, you have to go out there and
Right.
do it by yourself, and do it a lot. And that's really the only way, to do it. Because again, like you said, like creating a competent photo, it's kind of easy. Not to say that what we do it's easy, but it's technique, it's math, it's formula. Aperture, ISO, shutter, and composition. That's basically it. That's what you need to learn. Um, Afterwards, it's really like when you do it a lot, it's like recipes at the end of the day. It's like you can learn the recipe, but then once you start doing the recipe over and over and over again, then you're like, I'm going to add a little bit more of this, or maybe, like the recipe doesn't call for it, but like I've done it so many times, and I think there's for me, for my taste buds, it lacks a little bit of this that is not like it lacks a little bit of what do you say, cumin, or
Well, like almost like commingling, putting
no,
it
no, let's just
together.
say like turmeric for lack of any kind of seasoning, but it's just like it lacks turmeric, and it's like the recipe doesn't call for turmeric at all, but like for your taste buds it does, and then you add a little bit of it, and then someone else is like, oh, there's something strange in this cake. Like I've never tasted this cake like this before. It's like I don't know if I like it or if I do, but it's definitely doing something to my brain that is kind of like making me ask questions. And that's what you want, right? So, and that's how you find yourself and your voice is by really doing it to the point that then you start adding your own sauce, little by little.
I look at it in a way, and street photography is probably a really good example, like a jazz musician. If you play the notes, you play the chords, you can sit down and do that. But if you're a jazz musician, you say, oh, I want to play it as it's written, but then I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, and then I'll work my way back to the notes as they were written. And I think, with street photography, you could shoot something at, f8, 500ths of a second, it'll be sharp, etc. Or you could shoot wide open, and you could decide you wanted to blur it a little bit, or you could do a panning shot. So, you could have five photographers at the same place at the same time, but everyone could create a different image of what was in front of all of them, just
Yeah.
by tweaking those variables. And I think inevitably, if you showed those pictures to 100 people, those 100 people would find different pictures more compelling than the other just because of the individual taste of the viewer. So I definitely think that, thinking of it almost like a jazz musician or a cook with the flavors and the variables that you can do those. And there's kind of no right way or wrong way. Unless you're doing scientific photography of something, there's probably no right or wrong way to shoot something, really. It's whatever
Yeah.
speaks to you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's all going out there and putting yourself in those situations. Again, technique is something that it's good to have, but then once you learn it and then once you know it, then you kind of forget about it because at that point it's second nature, but also it can become a crutch creatively. And yeah, it's like one of my best anecdotes. It's I met a long time ago when I was living in Chicago this photographer. His name is Cos Strasanti, and he's like a sports photographer. He's done like he's won like a many awards. I think if I'm not mistaken, he even won like a Pulitzer along with
Hmm.
like some other people for like a story they published. But this guy has photographed Super Bowls, you name it. But he's into street photography. And in his spare time, he does street photography. And then he was doing like a talk in Chicago about street photography, and someone asked him, what's going through your mind when you like press the shutter? And he was like, I hope it's in focus.
Yeah,
That's what's
keep it
going through my
simple.
mind. It's like I'm concentrated into what I'm seeing too much that I can't think of anything else other than like what is in front of me. And it's funny because I'm not gonna say the name, but I remember asking this very well known photographer at some point. It's like what comes first for you, like composition or the moment? It's like, oh, composition is like bullshit, BS. It's like you see their photos. The composition is not what comes at you. It's really the moment. But I think we are so trained to like answer what we think people want to hear, from the technical point of view, that it's like no, it's really about the moment. But again, like you need to be there, and that's the one thing that it's different. It's like you're not gonna create photos if you're not there. So you have to like put
Right.
yourself out there every day and take risks, and those risks will pay off eventually.
Got to spend time doing it. There's no substitute. Well, I know, Omar, that people are going to want to check out all your work and just kind of keep up with you from a social media or internet standpoint. What are the best places for people to go to be able to stay on top of what you're doing?
On a daily basis, you'll see me on Instagram. My Instagram is Omar Z Robles, Z as in zebra. And basically that's my handle in almost every other social media platform except for TikTok because I'm not in there. Then I kind of was a little bit, and then I lost that account, and then I haven't been able to recover it. So I'm not I'm not posting anything there, but I'm on Instagram, on Twitter as at Omar Z Robles. That's where on Twitter is more where I promote all the NFT work. So if you're interested in NFTs and to any of the work that I'm doing now, you can go on Twitter, find what I'm up to over there in that sense. And then my websites, I have actually two websites. They're both Omar C Robles. One is omarcrobles.com, and that's where you can purchase prints of my work. And then omarcrobles.xyz, and that's more like informative. And that's actually where you can buy my book as well.
Okay.
So yeah, those are my platforms.
Well,
And
the
then
book
YouTube,
is
but
fan.
I really post very rarely on YouTube. It's mostly Instagram. YouTube, like I said, it takes so much time that it's like another monster.
Yeah, it's hard to be focused on what you're doing when you've got to just answer to all these different platforms. It's just a lot. Well, Omar, I appreciate you taking the time to
Of
share
course.
your thoughts and experiences with everybody, and I know that everybody listening appreciates it. So I thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
I want to remind everybody that we have a new episode every 1st and 15th of the month. You can check out what's going on. Be sure to, as the saying goes, like and subscribe so that you'll get a notice when every new episode drops. Until next time, I wish you great light. I wish you great shooting. We'll talk again soon.